Hello, boys and girls. Today we are going to continue reading from our book, Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. So today is not about Peter Rabbit. We're going to be learning about a squirrel. The title of our book is called The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. Nutkin. Can you say that with me? Nutkin. It's a fun word to say. And a silly one, isn't it? Okay, so let's go ahead and share our screen. Let's see if I can do it a little bit higher. There it is. Perfect. The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. Look at that squirrel. So, this story was written by Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter was spending the summer with her family in Lincoln. It's a house on the shores of Derwentwater. This is all in England, okay, in the Lake District. And she wrote a letter about all the squirrels she saw there to an 8-year-old little boy called Nora Moore. So she goes on to write this letter to this little girl, and she talks about how the squirrels would come over and cross the lake when the squirrels thought that their acorns were ripe and ready to ripen. So let's hear a little bit about the story and see what we can learn from it. This is a tale about a tale. A tale that belonged to a little red squirrel. And his name was Nutkin. He had a brother called Twinkleberry and a great many cousins. They lived in a wood at the edge of a lake. So that's Nutkin right there. In the middle of the lake, there is an island covered with trees and nut bushes. And amongst those trees stands a hollow oak tree, which is the house of an owl who is called Old Brown. One autumn, when the nuts were ripe and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Twinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. Boys and girls, give me one moment. I'm gonna go get one thing that I need and we will continue with our story. Thank you for being so patient. Okay, and we're back. Let's continue. I got my pointer finger. That way you guys can follow. Let's start from the top. One autumn, when the nuts were ripe and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Twinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. They made little rafts out of twigs, and they paddled away over the water to Old Owl's Island to gather nuts. Each squirrel had a little sack and a large oar, and spread out his tail for a sail. So these little squirrels started getting little twigs and they made them into rafts. I don't know if you've ever seen a raft before, but it's kind of like a piece of wood or a piece of something that keeps you afloat. So you're floating on top of it, almost like a little boat. And then it says that they paddled away over the water to Owl Island to gather their nuts. So they're all going to Owl Island over here to get their nuts. And then it says each squirrel had a little sack, meaning like a little bag, and a large oar. An oar is what they're using right there to paddle away. This is called an oar. And spread out his tail for a sail. Have you ever seen a boat when they open up their sail? If we're drawing, let's see if I have a piece of paper nearby. If I'm drawing a sail, or if I'm drawing a boat, let's say that's my boat, and this is a sail. So they put out their little tail or a sail. How fun is that? See that right there? Okay, so let's continue. They also took with them an offering of 3 fat mice as a present for Old Brown, and put them down upon his doorstep. Then Twinkleberry said, and the other little squirrels each made a low bow and said politely, "Old Mr. Brown, will you favor us with permission to gather nuts upon your island?" So the squirrels are trying to be nice. I think they're being a little too nice, because when do we normally bow? When do we normally bow, boys and girls? Yeah, when we're in church, right? We're bowing to God. So I think these little squirrels are getting a little confused, right? They kind of see them like they kind of see him like a fake God, right? Because there's only one God. There's only one God, but they see him as a fake God. So they're bowing to him, and they want this owl to let them collect nuts on that island. Okay, let's continue. But Nutkin was excessively impertinent in his manners. Do you know what that means? He was excessively, too much, impertinent with his manners. Nutkin was being rude. Impertinent means he wasn't watching whether his actions were annoying or maybe bothering other people. So it says, but Nutkin was excessively impertinent with his manners. He did not use his manners that day. He bobbed up and down like a little red cherry, singing, riddle me, rot, tot, tote, a little wee man in a red, red coat, a staff in his hands and a stone in his throat. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat. So he kept on singing and going up and down and jumping and jumping and jumping. Have you ever been like that, boys and girls, where you can't sit still and you're just jumping up and down and up and down? That was Nutkin. And he's singing this song. Riddle me, rot, tot, tote. A little wee man in a red, red coat. A staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat. Now this riddle is as old as the hills, meaning this riddle has been alive for a long, long time, or has existed for a long, long time. Mr. Brown paid no attention whatever to Nutkin. Has that ever happened to you, where you're trying to get your mommy or your daddy's attention and you're jumping up and down and they're not paying attention to you? What do you think Nutkin's gonna keep on doing? Let's see what happens. He shut his eyes and went to sleep. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts and sailed away home in the evening. But next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island, and Twinkleberry and the others brought a fat, fat mole and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, Will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather more nuts? But Nutkin, who had no respect, But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with the nettle and singing. Old Mr. B, riddle me wee. Hitty pitty within the wall, hitty pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty pitty will bite you. Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. It said Nutkin, who had no respect. Who's the other character that we've been hearing about? Yeah, Twinkleberry. And when Twinkleberry goes up to Old Owl, what does Twinkleberry say? He asks a question, right? He says, may I? Can I? Mr. Brown. He uses Mr. Brown's name. And he says, Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some nuts? He's asking him a question. He's not just doing it. And then here comes Nutkin over here, who had no respect, began to dance up and down in front of old Mr. Brown. And he didn't even call him Mr. Brown. He called him Mr. B. Old Mr. B, riddle me ree. Hitty pitty within the wall, hitty pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty pitty will bite you. He's singing right in front of him. Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. So he ignored Nutkin. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently, a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, a house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full. That's a tongue twister, isn't it? Can you say it with me? A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full. The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks, but Nutkin gathered oak apples. Did Nutkin ask Mr. Owl for apples? Yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump, playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. On the third day, the squirrels got up very early and went fishing. They caught 7 fat minnows as a present for Old Brown. They paddled over the lake and landed under a crooked chestnut tree on Owl Island. Twinkleberry and 6 other little squirrels each carried a fat minnow. But Nutkin, who had no nice manners, brought no present at all. He ran in front singing. The man in the wilderness said to me, how many strawberries grow in the sea? I answered him as I thought, good, as many red herrings as grow in the woods. But old Mr. Brown took no interest in riddles, not even when the answer was provided for him. On the 4th day, the squirrels brought a present of 6 fat beetles, which were as good as plums in plum pudding for Old Brown. Each beetle was wrapped up carefully in a dock leaf, fastened with a pine needle pin. But Nutkin, saying as rudely as ever, "Old Mr. B, riddle me wee, flower of England, fruit of Spain, meet together in a shower of rain, put in a bag, tied around with a string. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a ring." Uh-oh. Which was ridiculous of Nutkin, because he had not got any ring to give old Mr. Brown. The other squirrels hunted up and down the nut bushes, but Nutkin gathered robin pin cushions off a briar bush and stuck them full of pine needle pins. Wonder what Nutkin is thinking. On the 5th day, the squirrels brought a present of wild honey. It was so sweet and sticky that they licked their fingers as they put it down upon the stone. They had stolen it out of a bumblebee's nest on the tippity top of the hill. But Nutkin skipped up and down singing, "Hum-a-bum, buzz, buzz, hum-a-bum, buzz. As I went over Tipple-tine, I met a flock of bony swine, some yellow-nacked, some yellow-backed. They were the very boniest swine that ever went over Tipple-tine." Old Mr. Brown turned up his eyes in disgust at the impertinence of Nutkin, but he ate up the honey. He turned up his eyes in disgust of the impertinence of Nutkin. He looked up at Nutkin and went, "Oh my goodness, what a rude little squirrel." Uh-oh. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts, but Nutkin sat upon a big flat rock and played 9 pines with a crab apple and green fir cones. On the 6th day, which was Saturday, when the squirrels came up again for the last time, they brought a new laid egg in a little rush basket as the last parting present for old Mr. Brown. But Nutkin ran in front, laughing and shouting, "Humpty Dumpty lies in the beck, without a white counterpane round his neck. 40 doctors and 40 wrights cannot put Humpty Dumpty to rights." Now old Mr. Brown took an interest in eggs. He opened one eye and shut it again, but still he did not speak. Nutkin became more and more impertinent. Oh no. "Old Mr. B, old Mr. B, hickamore, hackamore on the king's kitchen door. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't drive hickamore, hackamore off the king's kitchen door." Nutkin danced up and down like a sunbeam, but still Old Brown said nothing at all. The other squirrels scattered away into the bushes. When they came back very cautiously, peeping around the tree, there was Old Brown sitting on his doorstep, quite still, with his eyes closed as if nothing had happened. But Nutkin was in his waistcoat pocket. Oh no. Nutkin got inside his pocket. Nutkin began again. Arthur O'Bower has broken his hand. He comes roaring up the land. The King of Scots with all his power cannot turn Arthur off the bower. Nutkin made a whirling noise to sound like the wind. And he took a running jump right onto the head of Old Brown. Then all at once there was a flutterment and the scufflement and a loud squeak. This looks like the end of the story, but it isn't. Old Brown carried Nutkin into his house. He held him up by the tail, grabbed him like this, intending to skin him. Skinning means to take off all of his skin off. But Nutkin pulled so very hard that his tail broke into two. And he dashed up the staircase and escaped out of the attic window. And to this day, if you meet Nutkin up a tree and ask him a riddle, he will throw sticks at you and stamp his feet and scold and shout. Cock, 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 kirk. The end. So, what a story. So we keep on talking about this awesome virtue of listening, right? To be able to be attentive, to be able to listen. Do you think Nutkin deserved what Old Owl did? Do you think Nutkin deserved that? Maybe, maybe not. Well, definitely we can see how Nutkin was not following directions, right? We can definitely see how Nutkin was not following directions. And not only was he not following directions, he kept on being rude. They used a word. They said he was being impertinent. He was being impertinent. And he didn't care about what other people were doing. Everyone else was following the rules. Everyone else was doing their share and collecting nuts. But what was Nutkin doing? He wasn't following directions. Have you ever done that before where you don't follow directions? Yeah. And how has that gone for you? Has it been good? Do you get a lollipop after you do that? Nope. Nope. What happens when you don't follow directions? Yeah, there are consequences. There are consequences when we don't follow directions, right? Miss Santana has a couple of consequences, right? When we're on our Zoom meetings. So Nutkin was not a good rule follower, right? He didn't follow the rules. And he wasn't very polite. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't address Old Brown as Mr. Old Brown. He just called him Mr. B, right? Short for Mr. Brown. So let this be a reminder. So when we're in front of teachers or adults, we can use Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, right? Miss Santana, Mrs. Cruz, Miss Tamayo, right? So when we don't know someone's name, we can say sir or ma'am, right? We can use our good manners. And what else did Nutkin do? I think it's good to be silly. He was pretty silly, right? He was singing and dancing and laughing, and that is all great things. We love it when we can be silly, but there is a time and a place, right? Do you think it was appropriate when Nutkin was dancing while they were having a conversation? No. So let us be reminded today of Nutkin. And let's try to not be like Nutkin today, right? Let's try to follow directions. Let's try to use our good manners that I know you have. And let's try to be saints today, right? We all want to get to heaven. We all want to grow in virtue, right? Virtue, boys and girls. Can you say that word with me? Virtue. Can you say that again? Virtue. A virtue is when you do something good over and over and over again. Okay, but you have to do it over and over and over again, right? But there's also a thing called vice. There's virtue, and then there's vice. Can you say that with me? Virtue, vice. Virtue is when you do something good over and over and over again, and then we're virtuous people. We're more like Jesus. But there's also a thing called vice. And that's when you do something that's not good over and over and over again. And that makes us look less like Jesus. It does not make Jesus happy. It does not make you happy. Okay, so let's try to practice on virtue. We want to be more virtuous, right? We want to make good decisions over and over and over again. Okay, boys and girls, have a wonderful day. Totus tuus, Maria.